Well, folks, let's get started. First of all, quiz 3 was due last night at midnight. And I only have about half of them. I reopened it and left it open until tomorrow at midnight. And so if you want some points, please do quiz 3. I wanted to talk about them today. Only had about half the class, and I need you guys to keep an eye on Canvas if you're not here, or if you're not on Zoom, then there's not much I can do. Then you really have to pay attention. So that's my plea. Do quiz 3. And so this is where we left off last time, Impressionism. So I made a dent in something and made an impression. No, it didn't happen that way. Just say it. Are you paying attention? Edouard Manet painted this, Claude Monet in his studio. And here we have Edouard Manet, who did the Olympia, the woman naked on the bed with a servant bringing flowers and stuff, and also did Luncheon on the Grass some 10 years before this. And so by the time we get to 1874, he's still doing things out of the ordinary. And in this case, he's painting in a very gestural way. And that's where we ended up last time. And we talked about, taking a zoom in shot of some of this brushwork. So it's gestural. That's the art term. You want to use non-art language. It's kind of sketchy. But at any rate, this is where painting is going. French painting, late 19th century. And one thing I didn't say last time, and I want to start with this idea. Claude Monet in his studio boat. One of the things that the Impressionists, led by Edouard Manet, and whose most famous practitioner was Claude Monet, one of the things that they did was they went outside and painted. That was radically different. The other painters of the age, and really for centuries, would go out and would make sketches of what they saw. And then they would come back to their studios and make the paintings. Well, these guys were really in kind of, they were out of realism. They wanted to make their paintings in their own way a lot more lifelike and a lot more realistic, even though the brushwork is not polished and smooth, and it doesn't look like a window to another reality. They went outside and painted because they could catch the colors of light. And that's what color is. It is reflected light. It's simple physics. We know that. We take that for granted now. But these artists wanted to get outside and paint. There's a French term for that called plein air painting. That is, you take everything outside. And that's what's going on here with Monet. He's in his studio boat. So he is outdoors. And he is painting outside. And why is that important? Well, let me tell you something. That what these artists did by painting outside, their whole sense of color was different. Their whole sense of color was changed. And when they brought these paintings back inside, they were brilliant, bright colors. They were like nothing anybody had seen before. And add to that the fact that we're talking 19th century, and even indoor spaces were even the best indoor spaces were mostly not very well lit. We didn't have all of the overhead lights and everything that we take for granted. Usually it was gaslight and it was pretty dim. And if you had a window, then you had some sunlight coming in. But bottom line, where people saw artwork was in a room that didn't really have a whole lot of light. That's changed in the last century and a half. Because when you go to a gallery or a museum, what's one of the first things you notice? They have track lighting and they put light on the work so you can see it for what it is. Well, this is pretty much the beginning of that. And so the beginning of Impressionism. And here is the guy, Claude Monet, Impression Sunrise, 1872. And you can see very early in the morning, sunrise. Let's zoom in on some of this because you can see, look at the gestural brushwork. Look at the sun reflecting off the water here. Wow, just kind of slapping that paint on. Look at all of this. These are boats and buildings and other structures around the harbor. There's a boat, another boat. Impression sunrise. And so this was, they understood that what they were doing was basing their artwork on their impression or on their own senses. And so this is, like I was saying earlier, last time we were here, all of this stuff about realism is kind of off the table now. We're doing things that go astray. A lot of theories why that happened. One theory is that we have photography. Photography kind of took the place of what painters and what other artists did, not only as catching reality, but we start to find that newspapers are starting to use photographers to illustrate their stories in the newspapers. That's new, because what happened before this time, and if you take a look at archived newspapers, they will have drawings. There was a big fire downtown, and they'll send an artist down there to draw the building and the fire and the people jumping out the window or whatever. And so, in a pretty real sense, photography is kind of moving in on some of the territory that was occupied solely by artists. Simple enough. And so they wanted to do things that cameras could not do. And a camera can be accurate but it's also kind of dumb, if you know what I mean. It just takes what you pointed at. That's it. It's a machine. Doesn't process anything. It just works according to the laws of mechanics, the laws of physics. And so this is really a beginning of saying, hey, there's a human part of this. There is what I see as an artist. And what I see are all of these colors. And what I see is all of this other activity. And it may not be a photograph, but it is, in its own way, maybe even more truthful than what a photograph could do. And so here is another Monet, and again, outdoors. And this doesn't really look all that bright and vibrant by today's standards, but for its day, this is a good example of what I was talking about. They would paint outdoors and bring this thing inside, and it was just like a sensory experience. You would see all of this rich color, and a painter in the old tradition, they would hardly ever use pure color. And so you see that here. This is, as you would say today, right out of the tube, cerulean blue. And look at that sky. It's bluer than most any sky you may ever experience. And the trees, dark, deep green. So anyway, this is what they did. On the bank of the Seine River, flows right through the heart of France, goes right through Paris. I want to show you something else here. Little tidbit. Art Institute of Chicago. And this is from Paris. Metropolitan Museum of Art. Museum of Modern Art. What am I getting at here? What am I getting at? This art met with mixed reaction in Paris, in France at the time, because there were still a lot of artists doing a lot of this stuff that was kind of basically neoclassical. I showed you Bouguereau, nymphs and satyr. That was what the Academy was doing. And we still had this idea of trying to do the same traditional things in Paris. These guys were kind of going rogue. And this is really the beginning of something that we would call later the avant-garde, the leading edge, the ones that are not following the rules and norms of academic art. And so what does that have to do with the Art Institute of Chicago? It has this to do with it. At this time, and for another 20, 30, 40 years, there were a lot of people in America making tons of money. Collectively, we call that the Gilded Age, where we have the J.P. Morgans, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, Rockefeller, Henry Ford, all these people, they're making tons of money. They are, in a derisive characterization called robber barons. But they make tons of money. And America, capitalistic system, you could get kind of monopolize the oil production, the coal mining, the steel production, the railroads, etc. Make a ton of money. But one thing that almost all of those robber barons wanted was class, prestige, sophistication. And they went and bought up many of these impressionist and post-impressionist paintings. And subsequently, after they died, they gave these to the Museum of Modern Art and the Chicago Art Institute and other American museums. But they went over there and they bought up a lot of this work. And so anyway, that's an aside. I want to talk to you about this. By the time we get here, this is a train station. I'm going to zoom in again. But look at this. And really, the subject is a train station. You can see the engine of a train here, and you can see the caboose of a departing train here, and another train there, and people walking around, and some buildings, but nothing is clearly defined. And the reason it wasn't clearly defined, and what Monet found so attractive about this place is that it generated a lot of smoke and steam. These were coal burning railroads. And so burning the coal would produce a lot of smoke. We wouldn't do that anymore today. And because they were steam engines, they produced a lot of steam. So it's really, as much as anything, about the atmosphere at this train station. And again, this is the kind of thing that if people try to take a picture of it, would just probably fall into being a big blur. But as a painting, you can appreciate all of the various colors, all of the various ways light interacts with all of this smoke and steam. And you can tell the difference here too. It's a lot of the white is steam, a lot of the dark smoke, coal burning. And so Monet himself, being probably the preeminent impressionist, really liked this idea of painting light and atmosphere. And one of his favorite subjects was this ruined cathedral. If you've taken this ADAH 100 and we went through the Gothic period, you know exactly what this is. This is a cathedral in France, and it's from the Gothic period, and Monet painted it. But not just once. He painted it over and over and over. Why? Because at various times of day, the cathedral itself reflected different colors. It was more in the shadow or strong sunlight or on an overcast day and so on. One of the other things when I'm talking about this, it's really important to know this. Look at the violets in here. And that was really one of the things that Impressionism got into in a pretty major way because they were doing sunlight. And sunlight reveals color, and this is how they painted. Now, in terms of the traditional painting, all of this looks kind of fuzzy, if you will, and it's not particularly painted in a traditional way. Take a look at this. See that? That's the sky, but if you were painting this in a traditional way, you would paint the whole sky first and put the cathedral on top. Don't ask me. Ask who's that guy that does the happy flowers and stuff, happy trees. Right, yeah, I couldn't bring his name. Bob Ross. Yeah, he would tell you to paint it from the back to the front. That's how painters typically did things. Not so much with these guys. They were painting everything they saw and painting it as they were seeing it. And so something like this, when you see the painting, looks like this might be on top of the cathedral, but that's not really what they were after. They wanted the light. Everything the light was doing. And here at the cathedral doors, you see this orange. Impressionism. And so probably as much as any thing that he's famous for is this, his water lilies. And this is oil on canvas, 3 panels. This one from the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. There's one in Kansas City. There's one right here at the St. Louis Art Museum. Have any of you seen this at the Art Museum ever? Oh, yeah, you should. Well, if you get a chance, you should go there. Now that COVID's kind of not such a big issue. It's huge. And 200 by 1276 centimeters. So what is that in inches? It's typically about 8 feet high and about 16 or 20 feet wide. So they're huge in scale. And when you get up close to this painting, it dissolves. When you're up close to it, you can't even see the water lilies. All you see is all of this color and brushwork. You actually have, because it's so large, you have to stand back really like a room's distance to take it all in as an image. But you see what it is. It is a lily pond, and here are the water lilies. And where did he paint these? He was actually pretty successful in his lifetime. He lived to be pretty old. But in the 19 teens, he was famous enough and wealthy enough that he bought this place at Giverny, Giverny, France, kind of out in the country. And he built this place that had all of this lush flora, and you can see the weeping willow trees and all of the other flora, and it had a lot of water, a lot of ponds. It was a wetland, is what you would call it. And he built this Japanese bridge, and basically during his time there, he painted water lilies and he painted other sites on his estate, and he never left. after that. He was an old guy, had arthritis, had cataracts. Back in the day when you got old, you really got old. There was no fixing age. But he finished out his life there. There are accounts of people coming to see him because he was a famous artist by then. And there's also some accounts of World War I, which was from 1914 to 1918, actually getting kind of close to his estate. He could hear the cannons and explosions and the gunfire in the distance. Another one of his favorite subjects in the 1890s, haystacks. He would go out into the countryside and basically today go out and go just take some rural highways and take a look around at what farmers do. In this day and age, basically, they have machinery that will take hay and they roll it up in big, huge rolls. They're like huge cylinders, and they let them sit out in the field so they dry over the winter, and that ends up becoming feed for livestock, and they have other uses as well. Back in the 19th century, they didn't really have that kind of technology, and they would take the hay, and this was how they would make their haystacks. And it worked really well. They weren't the scale that you'd see today, but he loved this, and he painted haystacks over and over again, just like he painted the ruined cathedral, just like he painted the water lilies at his estate in Giverny. Here's another Monet. This is 1889. You can see he's signed this here. And this is another look at the haystacks, a different time of day. And like a lot of things made by hand, no two are particularly alike, although they're always very similar. The method was the same, and look at the colors. Violet, pink, white, yellows. And a lot of times you'll find some blues in here and so on. This is what Impressionism was. And it becomes wildly popular. And it becomes popular in the United States, partly because we have a lot of robber barons buying up all of these Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings. So, Claude Monet, there's some other painters of the era. They have similar concerns. Some of them are not as gestural, moving the paint all around in a very haphazard, or what would seem to be a haphazard. Some of them a little bit more controlled. Calabiot, Gustave Calabiot, Paris on a Rainy Day, Art Institute of Chicago. Whoa, that's what I'm telling you. Americans bought this stuff up. And this one's not as gestural as what you'll see with Monet. But what is he really painting? He's painting all the rain as it hits the cobblestones and as it appears on the sidewalks, and how the reflections bounce off. It's still really primarily concerned about light. And if you were to talk about this in terms of subject matter, how the light is painted is probably easily as important as these just regular normal people with their umbrellas, because it's not an event, it's not a religious icon, It's not a king, a queen, a historical event. It's just life. And so to that extent, that's how Impressionism develops out of realism. Camille Pissarro, and I wish that we had a better example, but he paints not in that kind of frenetic, if you will, gesture of Monet, but he kind of dabs at the canvas. But it's still pretty much the same thing. A lot of color, a lot of how light hits everything. And again, not a monumental subject matter. In fact, aside from ruined cathedrals, mostly just benign subject matter. For instance, haystacks. What? It's about as benign as one can get. And this is an everyday scene, place of the Theatre Francais, but it's up from a balcony, goes outside, paints what he sees from right downtown Paris. Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And this stuff is Impressionism, but it's kind of starting to move into something else. All of these movements and all of these styles that I talk about have some degree of overlap. But Renoir, he didn't do just benign subject matter. A lot of what Renoir and some of the others start doing is painting pictures of the middle class and the good life. And so this is a club. This is an outdoor club, basically speaking. You see the drinks, they got music, they got dancing. It's what it was like. The good life in Paris. Now, some of these artists were derided for painting such things. Why? Because it was about having a good time. And that's not, to their minds, appropriate subject matter for something as serious as art. But like I say, these artists were breaking the rules. And so what is quite noticeable here, and I hope that you kind of are ahead of me on this, but look at how the light, this is the light coming through the trees. And we talk about light and color being the primary concern of Impressionists, and that's really what's going on here. And the shadows are this violet. And again, his brushwork, not that radically different from Monet. Not about the brushwork. It's about the color. It's about the light. And you can see that light coming through the trees and it's all over. It's just amazing. And here's another Manet. You see, he has these kind of he's kind of like the Godfather in all of this. And this is a bar at the Folies Bergère. And it's basically about the same thing. It's the good life, it's the club, and she is the bartender. And here are all of the partiers drinking. And there are some things going on here that people haven't really quite settled on this. But there are some people that ask the question, is this a mirror behind here, and is this a reflection of her? Well, we've seen things like that before, artists doing that kind of trickery. We saw some of that in Vermeer. We saw that big time with Velázquez and the Las Meninas, don't know exactly what we're looking into because it's got a mirror and then the images are bouncing off and stuff. But bottom line, it's about the good life. It's about the light. It's about the brushwork. Edgar Degas, another one. French, they kind of more call him a post-impressionist. But you see, we take a zoom in on this. You can see the brushwork's not that different from Monet or Manet or any of the rest of them. Look at how he painted these ballerina costumes. It just. But we got light coming through the window, and look at how he painted these shadows as they come through here. That's kind of impressionism. And I want you to turn your attention and look at this painting as a composition. And think about all of the painting we've seen from Renaissance times forward. Typically, the middle area is the central focal point of a painting, a work of art, a drawing, a print, all of it. The center is where everything points to. It is where the subject, and in this, it's basically empty. And you got this as a shape, the dance master, ballerinas here, got this heavy staircase, you got ballerinas here. It's kind of got a balance, but it's not symmetrical at all. And in fact, when we take a look, you could make a case that there's this big empty diagonal that moves right through the painting. What we're talking about here is a formal analysis. This is what you would talk about if you were talking about the brushwork, the color, and the composition. And so Degas, as Monet painted haystacks and the ruined cathedral and his water lilies, Degas did. Degas did ballerinas a lot. He hung around the opera house. He was very interested in ballet. And that was the subject. Now, there was something else here I want to point out, though, about this composition, which is kind of radically different than what we've seen heretofore. Degas himself was inspired by the camera in this respect. The camera, as you guys well know, because we use cameras like no other civilization in history, the way we use our phones. But bottom line, it takes pictures of what you point at. And if you don't point it properly, it doesn't fix it. Of course, I don't know, some of the newer cameras are getting pretty sophisticated, but bottom line is that how many times have you seen pictures of people and you kind of cut off part of their head? Or you only got half of it from this side forward because you didn't aim it properly. Degas was very interested in that. he liked that lack of subjectivity that had been associated with art, because here to this point, couldn't get anybody to draw a picture like that. They would have moved around. They would have moved these ballerinas to the center, or they would have moved out over here and drawn these full frontal. They gotta loved how these, what you might call happy accidents, occur with photography. It would do things that would be very, very unseemly for somebody doing a drawing or painting by hand to do. And he said, you know, this is a new kind of composition I can put together. And if I had a camera and I took this picture, it wouldn't be like a stellar photograph, but it does balance out these figures and that figure. And so there he was. He was starting to change things up. This is a time of rapid change. There's another ADAH. One thing that he brings back, because these artists were so involved, interested with color, he brings back pastel. And pastel, if those of you who have used pastel, chalk pastel, you know that their colors are really very rich. And so that's what we have here. Look at the blues, the oranges, white over the top, so on. Color, and what you would call here an optical mix of color. And so you could put blue in there pure, but your eyes will read this as local color. This idea of an optical mix of color. I want to move up here. Actually comes to fruition here. This is a guy named George Seurat. I'm going to go to the previous slide. Sunday afternoon on the Isle of La Grande Jatte. How many of you have seen this picture before? Yeah, a lot of people. It's like one of the most famous paintings ever. And look where it's at. The Art Institute in Chicago. And in fact, when you go there, it's like you go up some stairs and you go up another stair. You go in this room and it's like right there. It's like front and center. Brandis, you're shaking. Have you been there?
Oh, I've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's real famous. And are there any words that have gone that you've heard associated with this? Pardon? Oh, yeah, well, it is that. And this is like right out of Renoir and those guys. Middle class, having a good time, social life. But this, he put these paintings together by using dots, and they call that pointillism. Yeah, Van Gogh and this guy, they were all kind of working. Van Gogh used it more like strokes. This guy used, some people call this dotism. But yeah, it was, and they used this in a way that actually Seurat actually did this in a kind of a more scientific sort of way, because he kind of took notes on all of this stuff. He died young, but he would say, okay, like this green, you would need so many dots of blue and a ratio of 3 to 1. You would have yellow dots evenly placed. And then if you wanted a lighter green, more yellow, less blue. And so that's really how this whole thing was put together. And the idea being pointillism and the optical mix of color. And so there are a lot of people that have looked at this period of time and they've seen Seurat and they said, you know, this is really in a lot of ways a much more scientific approach rather than responding to nature or trying to do something from an emotional standpoint, trying to evoke an emotion, an emotional response in the viewer. This was kind of chill, if you will. So here's what I'm saying. This was a scientific approach. And the optical mix of color is really what we're seeing there. But this is much more intuitive. And what Seurat did was much more scientific. Now, when we talk about Van Gogh and Seurat, they got all these people, they actually all knew each other. This was all happening in Paris, late 19th century, and they kind of bounced ideas off each other. And as you might guess, they were all trying to find their own lane in this new kind of art, which becomes known as modernism. And modernism is kind of the catchword that you would use to separate this art from everything that we've seen so far. As I said, we go up to realism and it was kind of the same stuff until Courbet or Manet. But at any rate, the same kinds of themes, the same way of painting within a range existed from 1400 to 1850. 450 years of Western art. And as I said earlier, the idea was to make a better illusion, a more real painting, whether it was paintings of stuff that you'd never see, like an angel or something. Bottom line, these artists were finding their own. One of the inspirations of the time, and this has everything to do with everything, Tori Yanaga, Japanese. And what happens at the time as these artists were trying to find new and different ways of making art, we get an infusion of art from around the world. And these French painters, as I was saying, they all knew each other. It was kind of a pretty large group of people, but bottom line, they were looking for new things. It was what modernism was all about. We have a new age, we have new lifestyles, we need a new art. And because of colonialism and because of trade around the world, they started seeing art from faraway places. And Japan was one of the first places that they were seeing art from. We're going to go through modernism and the influence of African art, art from indigenous people in the Americas and so on. But bottom line is they liked this. They said, you know, this is very, in its own way, very simplistic. It's line, flat color, but it has everything. It has a sense of space, has an emotional content, two women at the bath. And I'm exactly sure where the other woman is. But there she is. And this is a bathtub, and this is kind of like looking through a window. Hey, God said, you know, what a wonderful subject matter. Oh, never mind. This is a detail of two women. Here's another part of it. But you can see they're starting to see art from around the world, and it's influencing them. I'm going to show you a Van Gogh in a minute here. This is something that one of you guys wrote about on quiz 3. I forgot who did it. Nocturne in Black and Gold, Falling Rocket. And what is so unusual about this, as I asked you to pick out something that's a little hard to understand, this is mostly darkness, and it is. It's nighttime, and this is fireworks. This is essentially fireworks. And so how do you paint that? And Whistler was, again, influenced by all these French artists, and they were interested in light, and they was interested in light in a dark night sky. And that's really what this painting is about. And here is where the fireworks are coming from, but it's kind of nondescript. We see somebody standing here on the edge of the river and, you know, light. Mary Cassatt, the child's bath, again, painted like Impressionism. And take a look at some of the colors here. In some cases, pure greens, and how they look at that. See where the cursor is? Blue on the face. And it works. So interested in color. Mary Cassatt was an American, and she moved to Paris because Paris at the time have all of this artistic activity, but Paris in the late 19th century was like where much was happening. Scientific discoveries, art, advances in art, advances in medicine, engineering, literature. It's like where everything was happening. And she went there, and she went and painted with the Impressionists. And one thing that a lot of art historians have talked about is that Mary Cassatt did a lot of paintings, mostly in somewhat Impressionist style, but she painted subjects near and dear to her heart. And oftentimes they were about being a woman and motherhood. And so the child's bath, perfect, Mary Cassatt. Berthe Morisot, Summer's Day, much more impressionistic. Another woman participating in Impressionism. The thing you start to see too, I showed you Monet. This is Berthe Morisot. We start seeing artists put their names on signing their work on the front. That didn't used to happen. You won't see a Da Vinci with Leonardo written on it, or Michelangelo, or a lot of them. But anyway, but this, again, this is right out of the playbook of Manet and Monet. A lot of gestural work, a lot of color, and again, painted outdoors to get a sense of the real color. There's another Berthe Morisot, and like Mary Cassatt, painted a lot of women and a lot of women's concerns, like motherhood, in the villa at the seaside. Toulouse-Lautrec. Somebody gave me a Toulouse-Lautrec in the quiz 3 too. Gave me this one, by the way. But I showed you Degas in that crazy diagonal empty space. This is kind of like that too. There's the bar, but it's taken up like almost a quarter of this painting, and it's just nothing but a wooden bar counter. And you see here, this is probably one of the coolest things, I think, in Impressionism, post-Impressionism work. She's wearing white makeup, and look how that light hits her face. It makes her look green. And when we talk about light and how light hits things, this is, and again, at the club, at the Moulin Rouge. Middle class, subjects not depressing, often painting outdoors, but painting indoors when there's a party going on. And so this was the one that one of you guys were, I got them all mixed up now. I read it this afternoon. This lithograph, as I was saying, that print that we saw here, that's a woodblock print. And that's typically the kind of art that we see arrive in Paris. Printmaking. Japanese been doing printmaking for centuries, if not millennia. And these artists say, hey, wait a minute, printmaking, let's bring that back too. And so here is Toulouse-Lautrec signature. Henry Toulouse-Lautrec. Anyway, this is a poster. It's a poster about an entertainer. Again, the good life, the partying, the clubs. She was an entertainer, she was a dancer, and here we got somebody playing a stringed instrument. I'm thinking it's probably a bass fiddle, but I don't know. At any rate, you see the music note, but this is flat areas of color that take place of model color. And so we see, and I showed you this, when we go to Van Gogh, and he is probably the most famous post-impressionist, because what we get to this point, we get Impressionism and a lot of variations and a lot of different themes. And then another group comes along in the 1880s and they want to ramp it up some more. They want to do even more things than the Impressionists would do. So Van Gogh, interesting guy. He wanted to combine Impressionist painting with a lot of things that he saw. The potato eaters. He talked about Courbet's, the stone breakers. Remember I showed you that one? And it was drudgery and it was kind of really sad. Well, Van Gogh started off and he wanted to be a preacher. And he went to the coal mining areas of northern France and Belgium in that area. And that's why this is, he was Dutch, by the way, and that's why this is in Amsterdam, the Rijksmuseum. Bottom line, though, he went to minister to the coal miners. And being a coal miner in that day and age, was a pretty tough life. Spent 12, 15, 16 hours a day underground, digging coal. And they didn't really make a lot of money. And because they didn't make a lot of money, they had to get by with whatever they could. And the cheapest food was potatoes. You could buy a big bag of them for a little bit of money. Real cheap, and that's what they're doing. Pouring some tea or some coffee here. Bottom line, the potato eaters don't have any meat, don't have anything, just sustenance, living. Coal miners, Northwestern Europe. And that's what this was. And it's really kind of dark. It's kind of like the Stonebreakers and Van Gogh. We know that he started out interested in realism. And here he is doing his homage to Japanese art, flowering plum tree. He's got some Japanese kanji around the perimeter. But again, he's going to Paris, seeing all of what these people like Seurat and Manet and Monet, and he's also finding out about all of this art from Asia that their first experience. It was like a revelation. Boom, my head exploded. And so we start to see this, the Night Cafe. And he comes up with his own version. It's not really Impressionism. It's even kind of more than that. And Randus talked about that optical mix of color as it was with Seurat, with pointillism. You see, these are like in directed brush strokes. And check this out. Look at how I painted the light there. Just all of these strokes, kind of not pointillism, but brush strokes. And he's learning a lot about color, which is what the Impressionists were all about. And so Yale University Art Gallery, like I said, Americans own much of this. But Van Gogh, being who he was and being so famous, they've made a number of movies about his life. This was one of the big ones. This was from 1956, titled Lust for Life, and it's actually a novel by a guy named Irving Stone, and it was written in the 50s, and we got this based on a novel by Irving Stone. What we get in the 1950s is a kind of interest in who were all of these people. And so this is Kirk Douglas as Vincent Van Gogh. And this is the movie poster. Bottom line, he would have been astounded to find out that he had become so famous, because in his lifetime, and he died young, but he wasn't very successful. And Van Gogh's life, Van Gogh's artwork, and in fact, much of this is popular worldwide. I mean, if a Van Gogh would come up for sale at auction, you would probably start the bidding at like 100 or 150 million dollars. That's the status. But they don't come up for sale because they're worth so much. But anyway, right now at the Galleria, the immersive experience at the St. Louis Galleria, Beyond Van Gogh. And I haven't been there, but I gotta get there sometime before it closes. Let me see if I can get this. Yeah, now through the 30th of March, so we got like 9 days left. Let me see, make sure my Zoom people can see that. Yes, they can. Good. And so basically what they have done is project all of this Van Gogh brushwork and color and put it all over the walls, the floor, everything, so that you as a human are actually walking into these Van Gogh paintings. And so, anyway. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
My brother, he went to,
He did? How do you like it?
yeah, he said it was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking. I talked to some people that were there too. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Let's share this. Gotta make sure I'm still on track. Yeah, there we are. This is Van Gogh's most famous work, Starry Night. And again, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And this one lends itself to analysis probably as well as any of the paintings done by Van Gogh, probably because it has been written about so extensively and researched extensively. But what you have here, this is a starry night, but you got the moon and the stars, but they're not just these little twinkles in the sky, they're huge fireballs. And the sky itself is swirling, and the sky itself actually conforms to the landscape. And so this is the wind blowing over the top of the rolling hills. We see the cypress tree, and it's blowing in the wind, as they say. And it's got all that brushstroke and stuff that Randis was talking about. And people have talked about this work as being a much more emotional portrayal. And a lot of people have interpreted this as being the life forces, the cosmic forces of the universe, more than just stars twinkling in the sky, but they are actually portrayals of cosmic energy. And everything is subjected to that energy. The hills, they follow that energy, the wind, the town, everything, the starry night. And so if you take a look at Van Gogh's work, especially 1889, that last year of his life, a lot of his work can be interpreted that way. That it's not just about the subject, but it's about energies and forces and nature, stuff you can't see, but a lot of people feel and what a lot of people believe exists. And so, with that being said, any questions? Okay, one last reminder. If you haven't done quiz 3, do it, because that's where we're going to pick it up on Wednesday. And so, So that's the conclusion of another day in art history class. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Be good, be safe, have a lot of fun, and I'll see you when we return.
Thank you.
Thank you.